Now I'd like to introduce Steve Ruggiero from Facebook. Anybody not know who Facebook is? You have to leave.
Thanks. Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm kind of honored to be here, that you would even be interested in some of my personal observations around of how technology and kind of IT have developed and what's, I think, valuable in the future. So just to get started, I realize a few caveats. One is your guys' job is hard. Mine's easy. Mine's here to stand up here and give opinions. I have two young children, and I think the hardest thing about teaching them, I haven't taught in an academic space, but the hardest thing about teaching them is convincing them that I actually know what I'm talking about sometimes. You don't know what you're talking about, Dad. Yes, I do. And then I think the other thing is listening to them, because I learn so much from them. So I have a great appreciation for what you guys do daily. And you know, this is my perspective. The Silicon Valley is sometimes a myopic place, and it's a little bit of a bubble. I come from upstate New York, and I've worked in Arizona as well. So it's a bit different, and sometimes it's a little bit of a bubble. And Facebook in the technology area is definitely a bubble. It's a company that's doing things in new ways. I don't think things have been necessarily proven out. So the caveat is you know, your mileage may vary. This is my perspective and what I've come over the past, I don't know, 21, 22 years. But so what I want to talk about a little bit is, for the agenda, is when I started my career in technology, in IT, there were fairly traditional skills that were required, and I'll talk a little bit about those. And as time has moved, and I've moved through my different spaces in my career, there's been kind of less and less traditional things prized, less and less traditional things that are predictors of success. And I wanted to touch on the traditional, kind of the less traditional, and then kind of some of the stuff that I've encountered moving at Facebook, which is I think it's an indicator for the future. And I think we're going to see more and more companies prize these less traditional things. And then I just end up with some very specific technologies that that are not only hot, but that I think that are going to be foundational for the future. And some cultural aspects of companies of the future. So let's see how it goes. Give you a little bit of context, because you always need context when you get information. I've been in technology for somewhere between 20 to 23 years. I've done a lot of different things. I've been a Unix systems developer, I've done C programming, when AI and expert systems were kind of in vogue. This is where I started out. We're working with the Electric Power Research Institute. Eventually found my way to Silicon Valley and worked in semiconductor for 12 years. And semiconductor is somewhat of an old and stoogy industry, if you will. They're process oriented. They're risk adverse. They move very, very slow. Incremental growth. And then I've done the startup gig in Silicon Valley, a couple different startups, which is the antithesis, really, of semiconductor, which is fast, nimble, agile, high risk. So I feel that I have a fairly good, broad spectrum of experiences to draw upon. So that's why I kind of was excited to come here and talk today. So, I mean, this is really the whole talk, if you will. When I first started out, a lot of emphasis on that top green bubble, which was technical depth and operations. And I remember going into interviews when I got out of college and trying to find a job. And they were very, very focused interviews on what had you done technically, what languages did you know, how did you program, did you operate computers, have you had a computer and have you played with it, broken it, fixed it, and almost no emphasis on communication skills, on teaming, on, on influencing skills, and completely far out on the horizon was any expectation that I would have any understanding about business whatsoever. It was, you know, we wanted you for this very narrow spectrum. We wanted you to do this very narrow thing. And if you could do it as an expert, great. And as you got into the work world, what you found was the people who were succeeding were the people who were gurus, who were the Unix guy who knew everything top to bottom. And eventually he'd get pushed to management, which he didn't have communication or teaming or leadership skills, and things went awry. So I've seen a more holistic approach over the past 20 years, from the technology skills becoming somewhat commoditized and those being table stakes, and communication, teaming, influencing skills starting to be prized for management, for planning, and for leadership. And then over the past 5 or 6 years, IT has gone through a pretty dramatic shift, which is you're expected to be a business person. Really don't care about that IT stuff underneath the hood, but we're expecting you to know business and how technology affects and impacts business. And this has been a general march that I've seen through my career. And then when I got into Facebook and when I've started doing the startup gig, it's not only been that you're expected to know technology, business, and communication, but you better be doing something you love. You better be doing something that you have passion for, and you better be doing something that you eat, breathe, live every single day. And I think that's the real story about what the skills are that are going to be needed in the future, which is it's this synthesis of business, communication, teaming, people, and technology skills all wrapped around what you want to do as a person. And I see that more and more in Silicon Valley. I see it in the job interviews we do for people. And I think, you know, this is kind of what I wanted to communicate, and I wanted to go down on different components and vectors of this. So traditional stuff, like I said, table stakes, you know, show up, do your homework, read the manual, know the technology. And we do look for analytic skills. We look for the ability to form hypotheses, computer science foundations, being an expert in your technical domain. And the rigor that I got from my physics and computer science career, or education, the rigor I got serves me daily. And when I do my 8th grade homework with my son every night for an hour, I pound on him on math and science for 2 reasons. One is that rigor, that analysis and critical thinking, the ability to hold a problem in your head, be precise, move through the problem, and get to the answer in a rigorous fashion is absolutely necessary in technology. You meet people who are just brilliant, and they are focused, and they are quick, and they have a rigor. And the way I have found that I could somewhat keep up, certainly not lead, but somewhat keep up, is my math and science training. It made me sit down. It made me quiet myself. It made me go step to step. It made me understand everything. And I think that basis and demanding that from students is so very important because these are brilliant people who are changing the world, and they have that focus. And this is I think, the academic area that gives that focus. And then less traditional is kind of, I broke it down into 3 things. One is, when I was in school, I knew there was an answer somewhere always. I didn't have the teacher's key, perhaps, but I knew there was usually an answer, and I was trying to find the answer. And then I look back on my most best educational experiences, and they were the ones that actually we didn't even know if there was an answer. And this is what I'm called upon to do every day, is that there is no right answer. And finding a data to support your argument, having the ability to be decisive with incomplete information, hugely valuable in what I do every day, and taking action in the face of uncertainty. I walked into my boss's office one day, and she said, you know, what's the, I forgot what it was, what's the cost per laptop that we're going to need next year and the year after? And I was like, well, you know, I got to go. And she said, look, I pay you not necessarily to know the right answer right now, but I need this answer because I'm going into a meeting and I need a ballpark guess. And it's got to be within 10 or 20%. So that's what I need from you. You know, and there's an example of, there is no right answer really. There's taking knowledge, synthesizing it, taking action in the face of uncertainty, and moving. Because if you can't do that, and you wait for the right answer, it's always too late in business. It's always too late in what we're doing in Facebook. Is if you find the right answer, someone else has it, and you've lost your advantage. So the ability to move with uncertain data. And then the center one is, you know, gurus are not required anymore. It's certainly nice to be very deep and very knowledgeable, but it's team, team, team. Things are too complex for any one person. You see these guys turning out technology that is across multiple domains and across multiple stacks. And what you realize is that things are too complex to do yourself anymore. Where you could sit down and write a program before, you can't do that anymore. You need people around you to team and to develop and to produce something. And this gets in with influencing and leadership. And in the most extreme case, if you take Facebook, it's really a teaming tool. It's, you know, Facebook translated the entire site by using crowdsourcing. What they did was they went to the users and said, hey, translate these pages into French, into every language on the planet, and they did it in something like a month. Whereas if you had done this with a team of people and you went and got their expertise in language, it would have taken you years. So the ability to leverage each other is becoming more pronounced as we move through technology. And Facebook is just one example of this. So teaming is going to be so much more important. When I was in college, we wrote a multi-processing operating system, a little play system on an Apple IIe computer. And it was one of the most instructive things I've ever done. You had to team up with 5 different people in the group. You had to decide what your specialties were. You had to plan the project. It was a full semester project. And the skills in relating and driving the project, in planning and influencing your fellow team members, hugely valuable. And then, and I'm not real good in business, but I over my career I've had an education in each of the companies I've had. And some basic business concepts are just critical. And I think in some sense, I wish I had done a business school, at least some amount of business school, which when I was going through school, I was always very enamored with technology, and I always pushed away business. But I would motivate you to motivate your students to have them get some fundamental understanding of business. I mean, daily I'm dealing probably more with business than I am with technology in some sense. You know, CapEx versus OpEx. You know, do I want to capitalize it and depreciate it over 3 years, or do I want to take the hit right up front? And this is critical for my budget and how I manage to buy things. What's the cycle time for my business? Order to cash, what's that cycle look? When an order comes in, how does it get into cash into the company? What's the time it takes to do that? How can I affect and reduce that cycle through technology? Makes the business successful, makes me successful, makes the department successful. And these are the terms that are talked about at the table with strategy, right? It's not, oh, the storage, it's not the computers, it's not the desktops, it's order to cash cycle. And if you can affect order to cash cycle, you can go in, talk to Mark Zuckerberg and say, I think we should do this. So in some sense, you know, business is the aim of technology. And I think that for your students, drawing that connection, it's hugely valuable. And then non-traditional stuff. I always like the quote by Western Union that saw no value in the telephone. So that pushing those non-traditional boundaries. And what I've seen recently, more pronounced recently, I would say, is, you know, this passion for always learning at every step and at every way, and the ability to self-teach. I remember I quit a job about 10 years ago, and my father, who was a federal employee and grew up in the Depression, and he said, you know, that's a good job. Why are you quitting that? And I said, you know, Dad, I just don't find that I'm going to work anymore and have passion for this. And he looked at me like I was like from another planet, right? It was just completely beyond him why you would quit a good job because you weren't passionate about it. But the people who you interact with daily have this internal passion that drives them morning, noon, and night. And you have to find that passion in yourself, and you have to learn daily. A disdain for experts. I find a certain disdain for experts in the industry, but at the same time, willing to seek truth from anybody who has a truthful answer, which may be an expert at some time. Seek out people who are smarter than yourself and hire them. This is, you know, A people hire A people, B people hire C people, which is a quote we always use at Facebook. But it's, you know, when you find that person who can do this better than you, give it to them, get out of the way, because they're smarter than you are, and actually you could reap a lot of rewards from that. And I find this more and more. It's less about areas of control in companies, and it's more about finding the right people, putting them in the way of the problem, and getting out of the way. Best solutions, I think we touched on, are multidisciplinary. They're across many aspects. And then the most polished technical answer just leads to paralysis analysis. You know, we have a saying at Facebook that is done is better than perfect, which is iterate, get it done, move on, don't make it perfect. Because if it's perfect, you've already lost. It takes too long to do perfect. And then this is the one that always amazes me. When I look at Mark Zuckerberg, when I look at the leaders of the past that I've worked with who I've admired, they've all been good storytellers. They've been able to grab a theme, connect with the people around them, and put what they're trying to get across into a context of a story that relates to people. And if you see leaders of business, if you see politicians, these are good storytellers. They're able to weave a yarn that means something to you, and it connects you to what they're trying to get across. Good storytelling, I tell you, is a great asset in what I do. I get up and give presentations, and the technology is complex. The finances are complex. I have executives who don't want to listen to me really. They want to get out of the room and get on to the next thing. And what they're looking to do is make a decision. So I can't bring them through all the detail. I have to tell them a story that holds together and leads them to a place where they see what the decision points are, and then they can make a decision. And it's not about the detail. Certainly they'll drill in the detail to make sure you're correct, but if you can't tell that story in front of that audience that synergizes with where they're coming from and leads them to a place where they can do their job, you're going to fail every time. So I want to talk a little bit about specific technologies to make it a little bit more concrete in where we're headed. I did my development pre-object-oriented principles, but the levels of abstraction that object-oriented methodologies brings is hugely powerful, and the students of tomorrow they're very comfortable with it, and they're comfortable in a way that I don't know that anybody in this room is comfortable with it. They just kind of do it naturally. But it's hugely important to continue to pound on this. When I was developing, I was a C programmer, and I was a damn good C programmer, and I had one thing to keep track of. The kids of today, when they're in the workplace, they use the right tool for the right job. They'll use PHP, Ruby on Rails, HTML, SQL. They go back fluidly across these different tools, and the reason they're able to do that is because of object-oriented abstraction. They're able to reach into a tool and say, okay, this is what it can do for me. I can interface with it very easily. Here's how I interface. Take this tool, I connect it to here. Much more fluid, much more. It's expected though. You're not a C programmer. You are a software engineer and a developer that can use any tool to get the specific job done. If you're working with a database, maybe that's SQL. If you're doing something on the web, maybe it's HTML5. But most likely you're doing both, and you got to connect those two. Open source. We're seeing a huge shift in the industry towards open source. Facebook is built on open source, massively scalable, massively parallelized on free stuff. And there's a certain ethic, too, which is not only do we, as a company, build our business on open source, we also give back. We have an open computing project that has opened up our data center design and our systems design to the world. And this is where the teaming comes in. We collaborate. We've opened up our design. You can use the design. If you use the design, you're expected to give back to the community, and you're expected to improve and iterate over the design. So it's technical, it's teaming, and we use it for business. Cloud, virtualization, SaaS. This is probably old, actually. We're moving into a shift where the devices we have in our hands are going to be dataless. We're going back almost to the mainframe era. Interestingly, IBM created virtualization 25 years ago. More like 30 now, I guess. But the technology around cloud virtualization and SaaS subtly changes things. It puts a higher import on security. It makes our devices less important and dataless. You have to understand concepts like multi-tenancy, because now you're on these big computers with other people, and do you feel comfortable being on them with other people, and what's the performance you're going to get? Networking. It makes networking hugely important. Through my entire career, if you were a network expert, you had a job. And that's right through, we've outsourced certain support aspects to overseas, for wage arbitration and for different reasons. But the network guy always was needed. Computers always need to talk together. Massively scalable, parallel architectures, and this comes back into open source really, things like Hadoop and Memcache. These are a different way to store data on huge scale. So I think the other thing is data. I'm convinced that in the future, there's going to be huge opportunities for students and for people coming into the workforce in this area. So what we usually think about in this area is database administrators, Oracle database, is these huge vertical systems that store data in one enclosure, if you will. What's happening now with companies like Facebook, with these large web companies like Google, what's happening is they deal with data in a very, very different way. They deal with it, they hook up literally hundreds of thousands, basically, of desktops, of small PC computers. They link up 100,000. We have, I think, something like 800,000 of them in Facebook. And the data is stored locally on local disks, and it's striped across all those 800,000 computers. So if one of them fails, it doesn't really matter. It's replicated somewhere else, and you can get to your data. But it's a completely different paradigm from a Oracle database. It's a massively scaled, completely parallel database, if you will, that sits out in the cloud. And what is being done with this data is phenomenal. It's the reason that they can target for advertising. High-level analysis across seismic data in the West Coast to predict earthquakes. The amount of data we're producing year over year, I saw the statistic somewhere, is something like, every 2 or 3 years we produce more data than has been produced in all of human history. So if you take that exponential growth of data and the technologies to manage it, mine it, analyze it, this is something that's really only becoming on the forefront of technology, and it's enabling things like Facebook, like Google, and these internet companies. But it's going to enable analysis in science. It's going to enable analysis in math, in astronomy, in economics. And you see this in economics. You see them doing experiments across hugely massive data sets in economics, coming up with theorems that computers come up with that people actually don't come up with. It's really quite amazing, and it's the thing that's going to develop over the next 10 to 15 years. And then UI design, web, rich internet formats. And then this is my last slide. I think I'm going on a little bit long, but I do get passionate. So I put technology question mark, because I believe that it's not just technology companies, it's most companies are moving in this direction. Diversity, cultural, global, multiple perspectives, various skill sets. We hire people because it's a skill set we don't have. Maybe it's not technical, but it adds to the team. Innovative, they're demanded. Iterative learning, done is better than perfect, I mentioned. And its impact is what matters most. It's not seniority, it's not hierarchy, it's not your knowledge. It's what did you do for me today? And how are you moving the needle in our business? That's what really matters. There's a relentless drive to eliminate hierarchy. When I came into the workplace, it was fairly hierarchical. Now it's a web. It's not a tree. It's definitely a web. And it's dynamic. It flows around what we do and the projects we have. It doesn't necessarily remain static for teams. And social for everything, right? It's transparent. We use it to review hiring. I mean, we run the business on Facebook. When you get hired, you have a bunch of people from across the company who interview, come together, and talk about cultural diversity, talk about cultural fit, talk about technical acumen, talk about understanding of business. We've hired people because we've said, you know what? Didn't find them very passionate. Didn't seem that they liked what they do, even though they seem to do it very well. So that social teaming aspect, it gets you in the door. And then employees, the shift in the employees over the past 20 years has just been humorous. I'm old, and these kids come in and they demand inclusion in the decision making, a space to innovate, a say in the policy. They demand a workplace that drives their passion. And I must say, it's taught me a lot of stuff, and it's made me young. So I guess that's all I have to say. Again, I appreciate your listening to my remarks. It's been quite a kind of a fun ride, and I'm learning these days more than I'm teaching. So that's good as well. So thank you very much.